Every dream worth realizing is worth compromising on. This is true of changing the world, where one person can never predict the needs of many. It's true of career paths, where getting a job adjacent to what you really want to do can often be more conducive to living the life you want. And it's true of cameras, where the best tool for you may not have every feature on your wish list. I always wanted a camera that would fit all my needs, a camera that would transcend the constant upgrade cycles, that I would spend my 20s revealing all of my truths to, but would continue to be a workhorse into my 30s, a camera that allowed me to establish myself as a photographer and videographer and unlock new worlds of creative exploration.
The problem is, I didn't know what I was doing.
My photography career began with disposable film cameras and my grandma's Polaroids, transitioning later to early digicams that my family would buy for family photos. For every complaint my family had about how these handled the worst case scenario indoors shooting for holidays with red eyes and green tinting, I saw potential for actually learning to take good photographs. I didn't have access to settings or technical knowledge, so I focused on composition and aesthetics. In 2012, I decided to spend my small life savings on a Canon EOS Rebel T3i kit. I should have bought used instead of new, but this camera, it was amazing. I took incredible photos, recorded my first true HD videos, replacing my iPod Touch 4's god-awful 720p video camera and starting learning to edit raw photos. I spent a good 4 straight years with this thing until I started to run into a ceiling. Most of my issues could have been resolved with investing in glass rather than a new camera. But the impressive low-light capabilities and 4K video from the then popular Panasonic G7 sung to me like a siren, and I went all in at the end of 2016. My video work took a massive leap forward through experimentation with vintage lenses, low-light shooting, and more creative lighting setups, really working on my skills instead of feeling limited by my camera. I kept using my T3i for photography, as the micro Four Thirds sensor in the G7 just didn't feel as nice to shoot photos with. That same sensor wound up quickly causing some claustrophobia. Filming most of my videos in small apartment rooms demanded using wide-angle lenses for just about everything to fit into the frame, and I felt creatively stuck after a bit. Recreating the shots I saw others make was quite difficult within these limitations, and my background was always distracting. A solution was needed. I was at a turning point in my career. I was making real money from this YouTube thing for the first time, and I was potentially going to make a pivotal decision that could take me from an enthusiast to a proper videographer.
Boy, I did not make the right choice.
In 2018, I made the classic YouTuber mistake of buying my first cinema camera. $6,000 or $7,000 down the hatch landed me a Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K, accessories for it, V-mount batteries, some lens upgrades, and so on. It was a wonderful camera, a true workhorse, but I failed to predict that I would drop the whole videographer working for other people thing, that autofocused and high-end video cameras would suddenly get amazing and widespread, and how quickly cinema cameras would shrink, with the Pocket 4K releasing just 2 or 3 months after my Ursa arrived, along with a Gen 2 refresh to the Ursa. No upgrade program from Blackmagic either. This thing was heavy and it didn't have autofocus, but it still pushed me even further at creative lighting, composition, camera movement, camera rigging, and forced me to learn and eventually enthusiastically switch to DaVinci Resolve and come to terms with color grading raw video. Years of struggle resulted from that, but I eventually got the hang of it. And Resolve is, well, I don't need to talk about it any more than I already do on a daily basis. It was also still a crop sensor, Super 35 sized. Not long after getting it, I invested another $1,000 into a lens mount replacement speed booster for it, which was game changing. Big problem though. This was not something I could use for photography, and I sold my T3i along the way to pay bills. So somewhere along the way after that, I also picked up a Canon 6D Mark II. Full frame photography had always been appealing, and the dual pixel autofocus seemed super useful for backup video shooting. At this point, I was in a lot of cash for 2 not ideal solutions to my workflow.
I learned a lot with the Ursa Mini Pro, and I think everyone should go through some kind of similar experience. But when it was time to overhaul everything again, months of research and planning led me to this little guy. The Canon EOS R5 C, a hybrid photo and cinema camera. Canon's clever engineering replicated exactly what I wanted from the Red Monstro and the Canon C500 Mark II, but for a fraction of the cost and the size. But I was still buying new instead of used here, since the R5C was basically brand new at the time, and I once again bought without renting and trying it out first. Was history about to repeat itself? This small box feels like a camera from the future, where a massive stills camera can also provide top-tier video just by adding a 1/2 inch thickness and a quiet fan. I'll virtually never want higher resolution than 8K video, where stills from the video itself are nearly 36 megapixels, higher resolution than any stills cam I had before. The choice was obvious. Little did I know that once I got it, there would be a couple incredible, not yet talked about features waiting inside that would change my whole workflow. After shooting manual focus my entire career, I finally accepted that autofocus would only benefit me when filming myself in shots like this. Despite the assist tools and workarounds, I still had to shoot retakes or accept autofocus stalking headshots way too often. It just wasn't worth dealing with anymore. I cut my teeth on manual focus, but I think I earned some time with silky smooth modern autofocus. Obviously, internal 12-bit RAW video at up to 8K 60 FPS is breathtaking. I'm exclusively a RAW guy at this point, but Blackmagic RAW was my gateway drug. It was a good experience for your first Canon, Cinema RAW, whatever. I guess technically I did Cinema DNG RAW first, but that doesn't count. That was only a brief moment in time. But now I can't film a video without it. RAW is just so good. Obviously, I totally can film a video without RAW, and I do it all the time still. But I mean, I never want to if I'm doing like a formal video production. Full creative control in post to basically do whatever I want to the image without, it breaking, with ISO being mostly irrelevant. And even in 8K 60 FPS if I want. The files play like butter in DaVinci Resolve on both my PC and now my Mac Studio. The images are sharp, they're clean for the most part. The size is perfect for cropping in and punching in or doing, pan tilt zoom inside of the frame rather than in camera if I need to. Reframing, stretching, anamorphic, and of course absolutely destroying it with my Voxicon VHS look pack in DaVinci Resolve as well, that I'm addicted to, glitch.mov. Canon colors are historically quite hyped up, and they deliver. But with RAW, I can obviously fine-tune them however I want. Film convert, dehancer, cineprint, my own grades that I've been working on that'll have it glitch.mov with crazy node trees and whatever when I have time to go all in. I have so much freedom to just destroy and perfect my image with these files. I cannot imagine just going back to log ever again. I don't like log. I don't like shooting in log. But when I'm shooting in log paired with RAW and the option to flip between Canon Cinema Log and Canon Cinema Gamut and Rec 709 in post, so I don't have to worry about which one I shoot, I have the option to just use either. There's a reason I want to film everything on this camera these days. The feature that completely unlocked my creative world was one I had never even heard of before: clear scan shutter. Got a flickery light on your set that keeps rolling lines with your shutter speed? Change your shutter speed to clear scan and it will match the flickery source and keep everything looking perfect. For me, it finally allowed me to shoot the biggest flickery light of all, a CRT television. No more flickery CRT shots. Unless that's the vibe I'm going for, which ironically you might see in the background because we're shooting on a different cam here. This might seem like a small thing, but my studio is full of these analog tubes, both for actual use and for video set purposes. Trying to use my favorite medium in my work was turning out to be a just complete nightmare, and global shutter cameras weren't getting any cheaper, yet. From glitch art to retro game captures to slapping on a macro lens and an anamorphic adapter and swimming through the individual phosphors and rays, I can bathe in analog video all day and create visuals that I could have only dreamed of a couple years ago. It's incredible. I did have a previous solution for this, but it wasn't quite as good. The Panasonic GH5S has a synchro scan feature, allowing you to dial in decimal place shutter speeds for more or less this exact use case. It worked well enough, though sometimes I still can't get the perfect decimal place shutter speed for certain sources, but ClearScan just does it automatically, and it seems to be perfect for filming CRTs. It's so good that the GH5S is back on webcam duty. I get to use my beloved cathode rays as much as I want in videos now. There's a lot of potential for me to work on there, and I'm only just beginning to tap into it. Photography-wise, the 45 megapixel sensor is incredible, whether I'm shooting highly detailed landscapes, tiny detail macro shots, or cropping in a bunch for rad photos of the moon. The large sensor helps me confidently print in big sizes too. I have a couple one-off prints for sale at glitch.mov linked below if you're interested. Nice luster paper and everything.
The headroom in the images gives me plenty of room to truly paint the scene I saw in person for the shots that feel lackluster compared to the real scene, like on my autumn hikes last year. These are some of my favorite photos of my entire career. This camera checked a lot of my other boxes. Great autofocus, small package that I could rig up or carry more stealthily, USB power, but alas, it didn't check all my boxes.
There's no SSD recording. The Ursa 4.6K Gen 2 launched with USB-C SSD support, making me feel ripped off as a recent Gen 1 owner as soon as it came out, and most video cameras released since then have kept that feature. Hell, the Nikon Z8 I reviewed a few months ago had 2 separate USB ports, so you could have power and data through USB ports. On my Ursa, I had a SATA SSD backpack, but on my R5C, my only option is overpriced CF Express cards, or proxies and H.264 or 5 to the SD card. I still only have one of these, and its 512 gig capacity frequently disrupts my filming session. Anything higher than 512 gigs is just completely inaccessible pricing-wise. With photography, I'm not really sure there's any compromise. Sure, there's no crazy 400 megapixel pixel shift mode like the normal R5 or the Panasonic S5 2X due to the lack of image stabilizer, but I don't really need that. I personally don't have many telephoto lenses other than the sweet vintage Spiritone 300mm, so getting long shots can, like my moon shots I like to get, can be tough on full frame. But between the APS-C crop shooting mode option and the camera and the 45 megapixel RAW files, I have plenty of room to crop in cleanly and still produce wonderful images. The only real limitation I run into when shooting photos is just taking it with me. Since it's my main B-roll shooter and often A-roll shooter I have for all of my videos, I typically have it completely rigged up with a half cage and a top monitor, a 5-inch Atomos Ninja, a V-mount battery on the back with some rails, and that's just way too much to take on my photography trips, but it's not exactly grab and go if I want to leave the video kit behind. This has resulted in me taking it with me far less often than I wanted for photography, but that's a me problem. With video, however, I have a lot of frustrations with Canon's menus and options. I've gotten used to them over time, but having used Canon, Sony, Blackmagic, Panasonic, Zcam, Fuji, Nikon, and something else for video at different points, Canon's menus feel pretty outdated or unintuitive compared to the competition. I love that there's a hard switch to go between photo and video or cinema, camera modes, basically separating entirely different operating systems for the different tasks, but I'm still left wanting more. As an example, a lot of the competition now just gives you a bunch of different frame rates and aspect ratios in a list or set of lists to choose from for shooting. In this camera, resolution and frame rate are entirely in different menus, despite one having a direct impact on the options available in the other. Also, I basically have to record in 8K if I want to shoot RAW with full frame. I can record RAW in 4K or 5K, but then there's a crop applied, which is kind of absurd. I'm so limited on storage space that honestly I'd love to be shooting most of my work at a lower resolution, but I don't want to sacrifice on the RAW recording or the full frame sensor, since those were 2 of the primary selling points for me here. I think I can output 4K HDMI RAW to my Atomos Ninja V, but then I'm stuck recording in ProRes RAW, which I have not had good experiences with and doesn't work in Resolve anyway. 60 FPS at 8K typically requires USB-C power, which is fine on my stick setup, but could be annoying for those looking to have a slim run-and-gun setup, but But one of the file formats I was really looking forward to having on this camera was the 120 FPS at 4K, something my Gen 1 Ursa Mini Pro did not have, and I virtually never use it because it's buried in a whole separate menu instead of just being a format on the list, and I can't do RAW with it. There aren't any aspect ratio choices at all. Everything shoots, for the most part, in the DCI 17:9-ish frame. That's all you get. I've repeated many times in all of my camera videos at this point that I really want to get a message through to Canon to give a firmware update enabling open gate recording on this camera to shoot a native 3x2, or I guess 4x3, but it's a 3x2 sensor, I believe, either for better anamorphic coverage or to shoot more retro styles like I typically do. But I know at this point it probably won't happen. We're 2 years in. If they go and announce an R5C too soon with open gate, I'm going to be mildly upset.
Plus, this $4,000 camera only has micro HDMI for video output, which I'm constantly worried about breaking. That just feels unacceptable, especially when Nikon managed to fit full-size HDMI on a similar body with the Z8 and Z9. There's no built-in ND, and while I enjoyed having it on the Ursa Mini Pro, since I don't do that much outside video shooting, just photography where I can crank the shutter speed to compensate, it's not been a big issue for me. There's also no in-body image stabilization. Meanwhile, the R5 has incredible stabilization. This is intentional, as is often the case for cinema cameras, but there have been some scenarios where it would be handy.
Maybe I need a normal R5 to pair with this. It would solve a lot of problems. Canon, especially for handheld shots. The RF lens mount is a tough spot with Canon, seemingly pushing out any third-party lens competition.
Actually, good news on this front. Canon announced back in March that they were actively working to bring third-party lenses to the RF mount and open up the ecosystem more. And Sigma and Tamron both just announced a whole lineup of Canon RF electronic lenses. There have been non-electronic lenses for RF, but none with autofocus or anything like that. And Sigma has like 6 lenses coming, some of which are really great on other systems. So I'm very excited for this. This is no longer even a sticking point.
There's tons of monitoring options that can all be customized to show on the EVF, the LCD, or HDMI out to your liking, which very much reminds me of my Ursa, and I love. There's even anamorphic D-squeeze options, which has been handy as I've been loving my Surae, and yes, I finally learned to say that name, lens and adapter. But it doesn't have the specific D-squeeze factors for my glass, and there's no way to squeeze the vertical anamorphic that I fell in love with. Now, Resolve didn't even have this until like 18.4 or 18.5 for custom D-squeeze modes, which explains my confusion when I was making my video on it and everyone kept telling me I was D-squeezing wrong, as the option to make custom D-squeezes in the aspect ratio control wasn't even available until recently. But they did add the custom mode, 1.66 for my 35mm lens and 0.8x for the vertical anamorphic with the adapter turned on its side. A custom squeeze factor option here would be a lifesaver. Seems reasonable enough, just like a little scroll wheel option.
So yes, in many ways, the Canon R5 C is my dream camera, but it comes with compromises, as dreams often do when you wake. I long for open gate recording, but I can get by with 4x3 frame guides and having absurd 8K resolutions in the first place. I mourn in not using it as my pure photography camera as I intended, but my supplemental camera has been surprising me left and right, plus I still shoot film too. There'll always be nuance or updated wishes for your dreams as you start getting into it, but as long as you get in the right ballpark and get something adjacent enough to your dream, you're living. And I sure am living the dream with the Canon EOS R5 C. It's just not perfect, as no camera ever is. It's hard to believe this will be 2 years with this thing, too.
To make your photos or videos look like mine, check out my look packs at glitch.mov, linked below. And to understand why I think no camera will ever be perfect, watch this video here. Remember to be kind, rewind.